I'm Jose Jimenez, and I'm one of the administrators for the Backspace Gallery here at the Jack Aarons Art Building. Today marks a very special day. Not only is it our biggest day, our biggest show to date, but it also marks the premiere of our new gallery, Backspace 2. And here with us today is our featured artist, Dodd Lee. How you doing, David?
Good.
All right, nice to hear that. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and your work?
That's a big subject. I'm a writer, fiction writer and poet. But I started doing art very early and got my undergraduate degree in painting and art history. The story is really just moving from genre to genre. I painted. I had these, when I was doing my undergraduate work, I was really influenced by the abstract expressionists and painters like Jasper Johns and Cy Twombly, and so I actually made these large, like 10-foot long canvases, and had a couple shows, but then I was always constantly interested in the idea of, I would put these large titles on these pieces that had this really sort of weirdly oblique relationship to the paintings, which were abstract but also had elements of, they had objects often affixed to them, and so at some point I drifted off into the language side of things and became more and more interested in words, and I was also a really passionate reader for most of my life, and so I just sort of did this sort of natural morph into poetry. I also write and wrote a lot of fiction, and so that I've focused on that for many years. I teach creative writing at Indiana University, South Bend. And as part of that, as part of the whole writing thing, I've published 10 books at this point, and I think it was my 6th book called Orphan Indiana, which was part of the show that I did at Muskegon Community College. After I did Orphan Indiana, I was messing around with collage. I was interested in it again, and I had written like art reviews and stuff through the intervening years. There was a sort of natural progression. The next book after Orphan Indiana became a set of collages. In other words, I became interested in the language I was using. I started affixing them to collages, to visual art, and there was just a natural progression. I had tried to keep writing like another book after this Orphan Indiana book, but it wasn't working. It wasn't what wanted to happen. So what wanted to happen was this collage form. Not these, there were more sort of rudimentary collages with a lot of words affixed.
Just a style.
Yeah, and just the sort of playfulness and the sort of silence to a certain degree of working in a visual media. So I guess that's the story of how I got to this. It just kind of, at that point, it just shot off into its own thing. It's interesting, I think of, like, there are series, and I think of them as like small books, like chapbooks, or I think of them in the same way I think of groups of poems when I write a book of poems. It's a kind of collection that hangs together, that goes together. Okay. The poems are just separate poems about various things. They have some sort of thread running through them, formal and otherwise.
So you'd say that the process is you'd write, and then as a result of whatever you write.
Yeah, that was kind of, but in some ways I would just find materials and put them together, and then words would come out of that. Okay. It was really sort of the joy of just all of these things sort of threading together naturally. At that point of the writing I was doing, I was also incorporating found phrases and things like that into some of the poems. And I had done these Ashbury erasure books, which, you know, and that too, with this sort of finding, you know, I already had a source text, and then I made these new poems of mine out of these source texts. So there was something in this with that too. So, you know, I just re-engaged kind of with my love of materials.
Okay.
And there was more painting and like playing around with different media, acrylic paint in those as well.
Speaking of that whole mixed media idea, you did mention earlier, you told me that you wanted to emphasize on that, make bigger pieces with painted backgrounds.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, the idea that I'm progressing towards here right now, or that I'd like to when I can find the time, is to take these panels. These are the ones over on the other gallery, the other side of it. Yes, Backspace 1 would be a better example of that, because they're panels like this, but they are in a frame, you know, box that boxes it up, and then there's a background with a newsprint, all usually painted. Yes, I'm interested in like kind of reducing the actual collage. More and more, keeping it the same size, but allowing the frames to grow, and then to allow the energy of that outside frame. I mean, it's a little bit akin to the Howard Hodgkin thing. I don't know if either of you know that painter. He's an English painter, and he paints his frames. He's abstract, but there's a sort of, they're diaristic. There's kind of places he's familiar with and things, but his paintings just go across the canvas, and then he just paints the frames. But I just like the idea of not concentrating on kind of creating a sort of tableau and a collage, but just letting the sort of surrounding area become more active. So in other words, you might be drawn to the middle for a second, but what's more interesting is maybe possibly around the edges.